On the night of July 13th, 2024, a reporter for Pittsburgh's Action 4 News made her way to a quiet, charming street in Butler, Pennsylvania. At least it was usually quiet, but tonight was different. A few hours earlier, and less than a mile away, a 20-year-old man named Thomas Crooks had tried to assassinate Donald Trump at a campaign rally in the Butler Farm showgrounds. Crooks grazed his target in the ear, seriously wounded 2 rally-goers and killed an attendee, named Corey Comparatore, who died while shielding his family from the bullets. Crooks was then shot dead by the Secret Service, but after a local cop stalled his shooting spree. Inevitably, the national and international media swarmed the shooter's house, tucked away in a quiet suburb of Pittsburgh called Bethel Park. With cameras and microphones at the ready, they eagerly sought hints from residents about what might have made their young neighbours snap. But at 10:30 p.m. that night, Action 4 News' Yasmin Rodriguez didn't find herself in Bethel Park. Instead, she was sent to Lawrence Avenue, an hour away from there, but only a couple of minutes away from the site of the shooting. Rodriguez reported on the local news that a suspicious van was being searched by police in this quiet rural neighbourhood, a van with out-of-state license plates. From Arizona, no less. And, Rodriguez wrote on X, the bomb squad were on their way. The vehicle was eventually towed away by the Pennsylvania State Police, with a little help from the local Malinsky Towing Company. And that was the last anyone heard of it. Most media outlets moved on after a couple of weeks, reporting the next big story, tracking the twists and turns of the 2024 presidential race. For example, when the Democrats' new nominee held a festive campaign rally in Atlanta 2 weeks later, the would-be assassin's body had already been turned over to the crematorium. As Thomas Crooks' corpse burned to ashes, so too did the media's interest. Over the course of several episodes, we'll hear about the journalists who did not stop investigating Thomas Crooks and his violent crime. We'll tell the stories of these reporters from both conservative and liberal news outlets. We start today with the story of journalist Ken Silva. He travelled to Pennsylvania less than 3 months after the July 13th shooting to obtain Thomas Crooks' autopsy and toxicology reports. Ken beat the rest of the media to it. He was the first person to publish those documents. This episode will provide, I hope, a fitting overture to the panic in Bethel Park.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a veteran reporter of some 12 years. I currently work for kind of a small upstart conservative news site called Headline USA.
This is Ken Silva.
I started working in the Midwest. I'm from a place called Medina, Ohio, which is just outside of Cleveland. My high school basketball coach helped me get a job just covering high school sports when I was in college. So I while I was getting my political science degree, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was just making like $50 a pop going to high school football games, cross-country meets, basketball, wrestling meets, and, writing little 400, 500-word stories covering the results. My first job was covering a community called Lorain County. And then I got a job as a crime reporter in the Caribbean, ended up spending almost 10 years there, and was at a newspaper in the British Virgin Islands, which only has about 35,000 people, but it's also a country. It is like a British overseas territory, but it's basically a micro state. So right in my early 20s, I was covering high profile, drug trafficking, murder trials, national security cases, the offshore finance, the money laundering stuff. You get thrown into that right away, which kind of, I think, helped prepare me for coming back to the US and doing, stuff like the Trump shooting.
I talked to the man who hired him, named Ben Sellers.
Headline USA is not a large outlet. We're not a widely known one, but we are one that does original journalism. We're pretty proud of the work we do. And so we wanted a reporter who was a shoe leather investigative reporter.
When Ken saw the news broadcasts from the assassination attempt against Donald Trump, he was just as shocked as everyone. But his journalistic instincts kicked in, even before anyone heard the name Thomas Crooks.
I was on Twitter right when he got shot. I think I was just enjoying my weekend, but immediately started working, really writing multiple stories on the Trump shooting every day, and really trying to get an understanding of what exactly happened.
Ken's editor, Ben, had an idea of poking around the story from another angle as well.
In terms of Crooks, I think right away I was on there looking into their home address and their, contact information. I think I sent a text message to the Crooks and sent an email to all the potential family members. Of course, never got a response.
Most reporters worldwide received no response when trying to contact Thomas Crooks' relatives, but there were a couple of exceptions. One day after the shooting, Thomas Crooks' uncle, Mark, spoke to the UK Independent. He lived only 20 miles from his nephew's house, but he said that he had not seen him since he was little, as Thomas had never bothered maintaining any relationship with him. Ken Silva found himself thinking about the would-be assassin's medical records.
And it was late July where I came across a news article in the Butler Eagle, which is the local newspaper up there, about Crooks's body and the autopsy results. And what happened with that is that the shooter, his body was left on the rooftop until 6 a.m. the next day, and then it was taken to a separate county for the autopsy. And there had been some attempts, just some people calling trying to get the results, but the other county, Allegheny County, said that even though we conducted the autopsy, it's Butler County jurisdiction, so we're not going to release the results. And when I read about this in late July, that automatically just set up a whole lot of alarms, and it just seemed like something really strange was going on there. And so I filed a right-to-know law request for the autopsy records with Butler and Allegheny County, where the autopsy was conducted. Both counties denied my request. That set off about a 2-month legal battle.
In a sad twist of fate, back in the 1980s, the deputy coroner in this same medical examiner's office was a man named James Frizzi. This is the same name as one of Thomas Crooks' uncles, who went on to become a distinguished neurosurgeon for the US Army Medical Corps. During the war in Iraq in the 2000s, Crooks' uncle, Dr. James Frizzi, served in Baghdad's busiest military hospital, called Ibn Sina. One of his specialities was treating soldiers and evacuees who had suffered head trauma, performing neurosurgical operations on them. Some of the evacuees whom he treated included Iraqi children. The Ibn Sina hospital was where both friend and foe were treated by American military doctors like James Frizzi. On several occasions, suspected or confessed insurgents were treated there, and they had to wear blacked-out goggles so they could not identify their interpreters. In 2010, Dr. Frizzi was successfully nominated by then-President Barack Obama to be made a lieutenant colonel in the Army Medical Corps. He became the chief of surgery at Fort Gordon, formerly named Fort Eisenhower. This is the headquarters of the US Army Signals Corps. It's also home to the NSA's Georgia Cryptologic Center and the US Cyber Command, 3 massively important centers of military cyber operations involved in encryption and cryptography, among other things. Dr. Frizzi's career was in the medical field, so it's unknown how interested or knowledgeable he would have even been about his comrades' cyber operations, but his nephew Thomas certainly would have been fascinated. It makes what happened on July 13th all the more horrible for his family. Indeed, one news report quoted a high school classmate saying Crooks and a couple of his friends were interested in joining the military after graduation. Classmates also recalled Crooks was extremely talented with computers and interested in cryptocurrency, even encouraging them to invest in crypto. As is widely known now, he also used encrypted email accounts. While pure speculation, if Crooks heard any stories about his uncle James Frizzi's career, that could have possibly inspired him to join the military, at least maybe when he was younger. It's unknown how close, if at all, they were. Dr. James Frizzi's sister, Mary, was Thomas Crooks' mother, and in the summer of 2024, here was her own son lying dead in the Allegheny County Medical Examiner's office. Back in Charlotte, Ken Silva and his editor, Ben, kept trying to obtain Crooks' autopsy report.
We had to make a number of filings explaining that the law does allow these records to be disclosed. Eventually, we won our appeal in Butler County. And so I got a call, I think it was like September 30th, around there, maybe October 1st, saying we're preparing the records. We're about to mail them to you. We need this special medical grade paper. to print them on. We can't send digital copies. So I'm like, okay, that all sounds good. That's fine. But are we getting, since we went through the appeals process and fought to get these, are we getting the scoop, or are you just sending them to anybody who requested them? And the lady I was talking to said, well, we're just kind of mailing them all out at once to everybody. And we had actually, they charged us this cost us over $800, this whole process. So I wanted to make the whole effort worth it. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to drive up to Butler. That way I could have the records in hand. There's no issues with it getting lost in the mail.
That was, of course, was going to be a big story for us. So we said, yeah, do what you need to do.
On Thursday, October 3rd, as he drove for hours upon hours, any number of thoughts could have been going through his head about the July 13th gunman. It had been widely reported how opaque Thomas Crooks' motivations and his background were. The 20-year-old college student having barely any social media presence at all is just one reason why. Crooks' use of encrypted networks significantly obscured his online footprint. He also used an encrypted email account to order materials for making bombs in the run-up to the assassination attempt. Crooks and his dad, Matthew, built a gaming PC together with what sounded like quite complex technology. In a video recorded for an oral communications class, Crooks said, "I don't think there's any better way to spend time with family than cooking meals together." But rather sadly, when Crooks was told he needed 5 adults to participate in a college assignment, he emailed his professor saying he only had access to 3 adults: his mother, his father, and potentially his sister, Catherine. July 13th, 2024 was hell for Matthew, Mary, and Catherine Crooks. Before Matthew found out what his son had done, he had called 911 that evening.
Hi, yes, my name's Matthew Crooks. I was calling in regards to my son, Thomas. He belongs to the Clareton Sportsman Club in Clareton. And okay. I don't have the number for Jefferson Police on hand. The reason I'm calling is he left the house here at about 1:45 this afternoon, and we've gotten no contact from him, no text messages, nothing's been returned, and he's not home yet. That's totally not like him, so we're kind of worried, not really sure what we should do.
Ken was the first journalist to publish that audio that you just heard, and he had a handy place to stay in pursuit of his other scoop that sunny October of the same year.
It's a 10-hour drive from Charlotte up to Butler. Made it there to my dad's house in Cleveland, Ohio, which is about 2 hours away on Thursday night. My dad's, he's a pretty conservative guy, so he's been pretty interested in this whole ordeal. So, yeah, he was, very welcoming and accommodating. That was nice.
But on Friday, Ken was in for a rather jarring surprise.
They ordered this paper, and I drive to Butler Friday morning, and they said the paper's not there yet. The lady's about to go on vacation for the weekend, even though the paper might be here by the end of the day. And that came down to this medical paper that they insisted they can't print the records on normal paper. I was just a little nervous. I'm like, okay, what's going on here? I show up and it's not ready. And I thought some foul play might be afoot, but it just, it turns out, typical government bureaucracy. So that kind of just forced me to stick around the whole weekend. And it happened to coincide with, this is just a coincidence that Trump was speaking in Butler the weekend that the records were ready. So I also went up, looked at the rally site. I think it was pretty much like a party atmosphere. I think most people realistically so assume that lightning's not going to strike twice. The feds are going to double and triple down to actually do their jobs.
And we were trying to get him on the media list to cover that.
Our press passes were denied. I think little old me got crowded out for giant international media.
Ken set out to get some information about the murkier aspects of the July 13th shooting.
Yeah, so this Dave Stewart guy, he had, just footage of the shooting. He was kind of filming the AGR building when it happened.
Make yourself small, bro. I don't know what's going on.
And it turns out he was this guy that had been working at the Sheets about 50 yards away. He caused a lot of stir online with his footage. And shortly thereafter, the Pennsylvania State Police came and interviewed him as a possible suspect. And even though, pretty much nobody thinks that he really was connected to the shooting, he's just gone dark. He's disappeared. His Twitter account's deleted. I think his YouTube channel with his footage is still up, but nobody knows where this guy is. And so I went to the Sheets.
For people not from America, such as myself, Sheets is a food court and grocery store chain in the US.
There's some people who think this Dave Stewart was some kind of intelligence agents who put out this video as like a red herring to get people distracted. But no, he was just a normal dude who was working at Sheets, happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I went to the Sheets and, a lot of the people in the food court where he worked, and it was a bunch of Trump supporters coming back to Butler. So I originally asked the people, people who buy gas and beer and drinks and stuff, and they didn't even know who Dave was. And at that point, I'm like, oh, okay, maybe this guy really was, this weird enigma. But then when I went to the food court, I did confirm that he exists. I was fortunate to run into the manager who knew who Dave was, and the manager said that he quit in July after, he became kind of semi-internet famous. At the time of the shooting, apparently he was kind of semi-homeless. He worked at Sheets full-time, but he didn't have like a full-time residency. So it's really difficult to track this guy down. I gave the manager my card too, and I said, if you hear from him, let me know. And he said he would, but he's like, I don't expect to really hear from him. It's not like they were friends or anything.
Ken explored the town of Butler that evening. Walking along its main street, he spotted a mural of an American Revolutionary officer on one of the town's many quaint brick buildings. Ken snapped a photo of it, sharing it to his followers on X. Just across the street from him, in the main square, Ken would have been able to see the town's memorial to Operation Iraqi Freedom and a few other recent military campaigns. A blue-collar town of hard-working individuals, Butler's local police had come under Ken's radar in his reporting. While the local police were certainly admirable in many respects, Ken had come across a couple of odd events while digging through the local news. For example, a member of Butler's emergency services unit who was on site during the Crooks shooting had reportedly shot himself by accident only 7 months beforehand. The local Beaver County newspaper said that this officer had unholstered his gun inside his office to show it off to one of his buddies, and that it, quote, accidentally discharged in what was called a freak accident, wounding him in the leg. He was treated and eventually returned to full duty. On Friday evening, Ken eventually made his way back to the local farm show grounds. In the sunshine and in the huge green fields surrounded by trees, he ran into a rather famous rally-goer. His nickname was Bricksuit, based on the pattern of his rally outfit. As he was a witness to the July 13th shooting, Ken took out his cell phone and started to interview him.
And we're right outside the infamous AGR buildings right over there. The Butler rally site's right there where Trump was nearly assassinated.
I was looking off to the Jumbotron to my left when the shots rang out. I turned back and looked at the president. By this time, he was not there, and all I could see was Secret Service jumping on top of him.
And while I'm interviewing him, a drone flies over our head. Hey, we got a drone right now. Okay, well, I think that's newsworthy. A drone right over the AGR building. Jesus Christ.
I mean, like...
And it's appeared to us to be a civilian drone, which did kind of make us a little nervous because, at July 13th, the shooter Crooks had flown a drone at like 3 p.m. that day, even though, law enforcement should have had that and be a no-fly zone. There's a Butler YMCA, and it was after that I go to the Butler Y to file my story. It was nice. I got a membership through my office, and I just went to the gym to kind of collect my thoughts, lift a couple weights, shoot some basketball for a while, take a shower, kind of refresh my brain. The Butler Y was where I got Wi-Fi, and I was able to communicate with my bosses and let them know that, hey, I'm going to have to stay here until Monday to get the records.
It wasn't an issue as far as we were concerned because we knew it was going to be a big story.
Night started to fall on the small town of Butler, and Ken drove the couple of hours northwards to his dad's home near Cleveland, Ohio, and he earned a peaceful sleep. He would need it because the next day, Saturday, would bring some rather unnerving events. But before that, let's briefly discuss another sad and bizarre irony about Thomas Crooks and his family's background. You see, the US Army's Dr. James Frizzi was not the only high-flying military man in Crooks's family. Crooks appeared to have another immediate family member, also on his mother's side, named Larry Macco. This man was mentioned in an obituary for Crooks's grandfather, John Frizzi. Larry Macco was referred to as a US Army specialist. There are two people in Crooks's family named Larry Macco, the younger being a cousin and the older being an uncle, who used to be married to Crooks's aunt, Cynthia. This Larry Macco Sr. is from the suburbs of Pittsburgh. According to some sources, he used to live in none other than Bethel Park. Larry Macco Sr. is a US Army Special Forces veteran, and he graduated from the Air Force's Air War College after decades of operational activity in 2013. According to his bio, Crooks's uncle Macco has worked with the military and, quote, federal law enforcement, helping to implement US national strategy at the tactical and strategic levels. He led culturally diverse teams on multiple continents in, quote, high-threat, hostile environments, unquote, working on both the operational and executive level. Since joining the military in 1986, Lawrence Macco Sr. earned numerous awards for his exceptional performance. In the year 2000, he became a member of the Special Operations Association, whose slogan is, Unconventional Warriors, the legacy endures. Since the 1980s, he had been a member also of the Special Forces Association, based at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. While married to Thomas Crooks's aunt Cynthia, Macco was based in the Washington, D.C. area with her for some time. After separating from Cynthia, Macco eventually remarried to a woman named Ruby Kehaulani Macco. Ruby was nominated before the US Senate in 2019 to become a consular officer for the US State Department's Foreign Service. It was sure to have been a proud moment for at least some of Thomas Crooks's extended family. After all, Larry Macco Sr. seemed to still maintain ties with the family, based on his former father-in-law, John Frizzi's, obituary. While attending the Air War College in Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, Crooks's uncle Macco attended seminars with a US Marine Lieutenant Colonel named Mark Raver. Lieutenant Colonel Raver went on to become Deputy Director of Operations for the White House Military Office from 2014 to 2017. After working in operations analysis for a few years, Lieutenant Colonel Raver became the Deputy Associate Director for the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations. That was from August 2020 to December of 2021, and he was based in Washington, D.C. Lieutenant Colonel Raver praised Larry Macco Sr.'s contributions to their seminars at the Air War College, and he was not the only one. A retired captain in the US Navy named Randy Blackmon sang praises about Macco's, quote, vast global, government and field experience, unquote. Both Captain Blackmon and Lieutenant Colonel Raver had been deployed to Iraq at several points. In 2022, Macco became a full member of the Institute for Coaching, based at McLean Hospital in Massachusetts, a renowned psychiatric hospital made famous partly because of the 90s movie Girl Interrupted. The reason for highlighting all this is to show how surreal and tragic it is that Thomas Crooks did what he did on July 13th. He appeared to be from a family with some extremely impressive figures in the military and from other government entities, and yet his attack that summer left a grave, sad, and everlasting image on modern American history. Now, with dawn approaching, let's return to Ken Silva as he awakened from his slumber that autumn morning. He'd recently reached out to a friend named James Rogers, who's a cinematographer, to see if he wanted to join him in Butler at the rally. Now, the day had arrived.
You know, Pittsburgh is within driving distance of, the D.C., Virginia area, but he graciously drove out.
I talked to James Rogers about taking up Ken on his offer.
He was just trying to go, interview people on the ground, neighbors and whatnot that lived by the Crooks.
But first, James arrived at the site of last summer's assassination attempt.
I think when I got into town, I pulled through and got footage of the rally.
You from HBO, you doing this on your own?
Independent.
Independent?
Yeah, I wouldn't work with HBO ever. God bless y'all.
The traffic was just a nightmare, and that was hours before the rally was even set to begin.
I stopped over for coffee at some point, I think waiting to meet with him.
Earlier, during James' cinematographic trek around the rally site, he filmed something rather creepy, or reassuring depending on how you look at it. A black car with what appeared to be tinted windows slowly drove down a narrow road beside the infamous AGR building. This is the same building that Thomas Crooks had shot Donald Trump from. James soon rendezvoused with Ken.
So we went to Bethel Park, where the shooter Thomas Crooks grew up.
Ken's friend was armed to the teeth with sophisticated equipment.
I must have had 2 cameras. The little cameras, the C100 Mark II. My favorite camera, by far. Just the most comfortable, balanced, easier to maneuver when you're inside a car.
The sun was shining like a spotlight on thick trees and animals eating those smaller and weaker than themselves. Soon, James began to film the beautiful Pittsburgh skyline from across the river. Driving from the centre of the steel city to the suburbs, they soon arrived in Bethel Park. On these same winding streets, a former classmate of Crooks had given a rather dramatic interview to a gaggle of journalists. The young man claimed that Thomas Crooks was bullied relentlessly at high school. Here's Crooks' guidance counsellor, Jim Knapp, talking to me about the news clip.
You know, if you would watched any of the videos, they talked about bullying. I knew the young man when I was there, and I know that I wouldn't put a lot of credence into what he said. Let me just put it to you that way without trying to attack his character in any way, shape, or form, but I just wouldn't put a lot of credit into what he was saying.
You'll hear more from Jim Knapp later in this series. Of course, it's still possible that Crooks was bullied, but he was said to have had a comfortable group of peers, and that continued after high school. Aside from the likely delusional or psychotic mental state he was probably experiencing, whether bullying factored into his violent assassination attempt, or a medication issue, loneliness, or some twisted sense of vigilantism where he perceived a presidential candidate as betraying the country that some of his family served in places like Fort Gordon, Washington DC, and as far away as Baghdad. Either way, Crooks' shooting was deplorable, and it shocked the world, and it put fear into the hearts of some of his neighbours in Bethel Park.
There's a lot of mystery surrounding the parents. Nobody really knew them, and nobody really knew the kid either.
They soon arrived on the street where Thomas Crooks had lived with his parents. James waited in the vehicle, filming his friend from the distance.
I mean, I wasn't really sure what to expect. I mean, every time I've done interviews in my work, I've never done any on-the-spot impromptus.
I'm like, when I knock on the parents' door, you gotta make sure you get the 4K footage of me getting a shotgun blast to the stomach or whatever. So, if we were nervous, we just joked about it to kind of calm the nerves. It's election season, so about 60% of the houses had Trump signs. There might have been 20% with Harris signs, and then another 20% that just didn't have anything. There was a neighbor closer by was pretty nasty, get off my lawn right now, and that's fine. Totally understandable. And I talked to a couple other people, and they confirmed that, these really reclusive people, but that's about it. Nobody really knew these people. And there are some neighbors that have been living there for decades. That's a little more surprising, where they don't know the family at all. But, Pittsburgh, it's kind of a city back on the upswing.
But Ken did learn something from the neighbours that was a little bit chilling.
The neighbors commented that there's a lot of SUVs with tinted windows are constantly driving by. So, I think the neighbors are still seeing a lot of feds and potential law enforcement.
James sat in the car, taking in the neighbourhood that had been all over the world's headlines only a few months prior.
I mean, the neighborhood itself was just generally kind of, I hesitate to say creepy because I don't know it. I don't live there, but it was like a little too quiet, if that makes sense.
Edging closer to the Crooks' home, Ken thought it was worth ringing their doorbell on the off chance that they'd talk.
I knocked on the door, he didn't answer, but they seem like they're hunkering down.
A notepad under his arm and wearing a pair of stylish sunglasses, Ken walked back to James.
Oh man, sorry that took so long.
How'd it go?
I just talked to a neighbor, but she wouldn't talk on the record. But we found out that, the dad, Matthew, is still living here. That's his blue truck right there. He's probably in the house right now. The neighbor suspected that he might have been looking out the window at us, which is one of the reasons why she didn't want to talk to me.
I thought I saw the blind shifting once, but I don't know. Yeah.
He's in there.
I bet he is.
Crooks's grandmother on his mother's side is named Madeline Frizzi. In the 1960s, she was a researcher at the University of Pittsburgh's School of Medicine, somewhat foreshadowing the career of one of her sons, Lieutenant Colonel James Frizzi. One of Madeline's university projects involved surgical procedures on baby chickens. Decades later, after her grandson's assassination attempt, Madeline was approached by the New York Times. She was short with them, saying she had no contact with Thomas Crooks' parents, adding rather pointedly, whatsoever. She refused to elaborate why. I found a 2019 obituary for yet another of Thomas Crooks' uncles, John Frizzi Jr., and he passed away in the southwestern United States. But curiously, Crooks's parents were the only siblings and in-laws missing from the list of relatives, despite being immediate family. Was this a simple mistake? Or was there some sort of division within the family? Anyway, on the sunlit streets of Bethel Park, Ken and James discussed their next plan of action.
What do you want to do?
Yeah, I think we might be tapped out here. If you want to go get footage, apparently the nursing home he worked at is about a mile away.
The Bethel Park Skilled Nursing and Rehabilitation Centre was where Crooks had worked part-time for several years as a dietary aide. In a small way, he was following in the footsteps of his aunt, Cynthia Frizzi, who had been the head of the Ohio River Valley Division of Erie, Pennsylvania's Gertrude Barber nursing home chain back in the 2000s. The nursing home where Crooks worked in was owned by the Carlyle Group from 2007 to 2017. In the year prior to Crooks's violent crime, the facility had been visited 12 times by inspectors to investigate formal complaints in its care for the elderly. In one such example, a resident with an opioid addiction somehow managed to escape, sneaking out to buy a bag of heroin and overdosing on it just outside the nursing home. It was basically the Monty Python of geriatric care, with one nurse accidentally rolling an elder off his bed before he banged his head on the bedside, climaxing in a 3-inch scar on his forehead. Things were made even more awkward for the management when their years-long employee, Thomas Crooks, tried to assassinate the former and now current President of the United States. Ken and James soon found themselves outside this place, an impressive, rather pretty building tucked away within Bethel Park.
If I remember, I think we just sat in the car for 5 minutes or so. Just grab a shot of it, basically.
A little-known tidbit is that in 2022, this nursing home, along with hundreds of others across the US, was taken over by Xxtrah Health. The American Prospect argued that this was on behalf of a nursing home magnate named Joel Landau. Landau did have several ties to Xxtrah's CEO, as outlined by Business Insider. He had gained a degree of notoriety. In 2018, Landau and his partner settled with the courts after a nearly 2-year investigation into a real estate scandal. And, according to the now defunct Hindenburg Research Group, Landau may have been connected in some way to a shell game involving nursing home and healthcare companies. The day was wearing on.
Are you going back to Butler?
I don't know.
If you want to, I don't want to waste your time. I don't have anything.
I got decent amount of footage.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I'll really need more, so.
Do you have some pictures you might be able to send me that
Yep.
I could obviously credit you in headline?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, let's see it.
It was a very brief amount of time, maybe like 4 hours total. And then we both kind of went off our separate ways.
Day faded into night. That weekend, while waiting for Monday's release of Crooks' autopsy report, Ken made good use of his downtime in the Butler YMCA.
Yeah, there wasn't much downtime, and it's just a good place to kind of reset my brain and get me back on track to do more reporting. It was a little ominous going into the Butler County YMCA locker room, which is like in the basement of this old building, and it was just like a bunch of fans going, but there was nobody inside, and I was like, okay, this is kind of spooky.
Especially with a certain quaint rural neighbourhood lying in wait close to the Butler Y. a neighbourhood that Ken was familiar with due to a certain mysterious van, which we'll hear more about in a moment. There was another thing that struck Ken. It was about Thomas Crooks' parents.
We believe they're probably under investigation because Thomas made bombs inside the house, which raises questions about, how the parents, how did they not know that? Law enforcement said they found bombs in his car, and apparently he had a remote detonating device on him when he was shot on the rooftop. And I think the feeling is that maybe he wanted to shoot the president, detonate the bombs on the other side of the rally site as a distraction so he could make his getaway. And this is all under the assumption that he had acted alone. But then there's these reports about a van on the site that was also searched by the bomb squad that night and towed away.
A few weeks before this recording, in June of 2025, CBS News reported that a little-known federal grand jury had been impaneled to investigate Crooks' shooting. But as CBS pointed out, why would a federal grand jury be impaneled when the only known suspect, Thomas Crooks, is dead? CBS was not the first to report the existence of this grand jury. It had been revealed 8 months prior by a former Navy intelligence officer named Jack Posobiec, who's now a podcaster and an author. You'll hear a lot more about him later in this series.
Closer to their actual rally site back in Butler, after the shooting on July 13th, there was a guy, William Thoma, Thoma, who lived about 200 yards away, who reported seeing police searching a van for explosives. This story's been kind of buried. Crooks is said to have driven, I think, like a Hyundai or something like that. The Daily Mail and Fox News both published stories on this in the week after, based on interviews with William Thoma and the TikTok videos of the van getting towed away on July 13th that night. And that's pretty much all we know. If Crooks acted alone, how the hell did a van get there? How are explosives in that van too? I do have another right-to-know law request with the Pennsylvania State Police for records about them towing away the van. And I filed this request just to get them to respond to say, do records exist? Is this story legitimate? Is this part of the investigation into the assassination attempt?
There were other witnesses too. One man from the area who wished to remain anonymous told me that his aunt was the one who notified the police about the vehicle. The local man had just finished doing a live stream interview with a true crime YouTuber that evening, and then he saw what was happening. He texted the YouTuber, who urged him to record the van as it was searched.
Okay, so I'm standing out of the suspected live van that they're investigating.
That same night, a woman named Melody Hook received a phone call from a friend living on Lawrence Avenue telling her about the ruckus outside her house while the van was being searched and taken away. There was a third news outlet that night that reported on the van. As described earlier, a local ABC News affiliate in Pittsburgh ran a broadcast about it. After delivering the report on air, Action 4 News' Yasmin Rodriguez wrote on X that the bomb squad were on their way to deal with the van. She also said, as did several residents, that the van had out-of-state license plates from Arizona, of all places. Rodriguez was told by neighbours that it had been parked there on Lawrence Avenue since about 1:30 p.m. that day, and at 1 a.m. that night, a man knocked on a few doors around the neighbourhood, wanting to know where his van was, claiming that he was the one who owned that mysterious vehicle that got towed away. He said he had simply left it there to go and get some food at the nearby Sheetz convenience store. As of now, it's unknown who this man was, or if he indeed found that van, if it was actually his. So, of course, during Ken's time in Butler, it was only natural that he'd want to visit Lawrence Avenue.
I went to the neighbor's house and knocked on their door. I was a little disappointed that his wife answered the door, took my card, but they never got back to me.
And then something strange happened.
I think it was like an F-150 with dark tinted windows pulled behind my car in the driveway and just sat there idling until I went back to my car, and then it just drove off. And I'm like, okay, that was a little weird.
A couple of months before Ken's trip, a Butler local named Greg Smith wrote on X that the van with Arizona plates had simply belonged to a drunk man who had forgotten he'd parked it there on Lawrence Avenue. It's possible, though the reports of the bomb squad do raise questions. And things get very strange when you consider the response Ken eventually received from the state police following his request for records about the van.
The police, Pennsylvania State Police, they denied my request on the grounds that we do have records, but they're part of the assassination attempt investigation. So that was, my implicit confirmation that the van story is very much in play. Whether it actually is connected to the assassination, I don't know, but I know that police are investigating that.
In May of 2025, FBI Chief Kash Patel told Fox News that the investigation into the assassination attempt was now closed, and he indicated that there was nothing more to the story of Thomas Crooks and the Butler shooting. However, the day after Patel's interview, our man Ken Silva filed a request with the FBI for documents from its investigation, and he was notified that his request was being denied because the investigation, the response said, was open and ongoing. Does that include the van from Arizona? Perhaps another right-to-know law request about that strange vehicle is in order. Monday, October 7th finally arrived, and Thomas Crooks' autopsy report was now ready for Ken to take home with him.
So, I finally got the records in hand at Monday morning. It was just a very triumphant moment in my own mind, I guess. We're a tiny little site called Headline USA, and we were managed to get these records before the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, ABC, NBC, any of the big multi-billion-dollar outlets. Walked out of the courthouse, immediately went to the coffee shop across the street and just took photos of him real quick, typed up a story.
A couple of things stood out to Ken.
The two most interesting things for me is that Crooks had 5 gunshot wounds and that he wasn't tested for psychotropics or prescription drugs. They tested him for narcotics and drugs of abuse, which, fine, that's all well and good, but they didn't even test for cannabis or any drugs that might indicate whether he was suffering from schizophrenia, which there are indications that he was suffering from severe mental health problems. According to the FBI, he had been searching for, quote, major depressive disorder in the weeks leading up to a shooting. There was his family said he would pace up and down and flap his arms in weird ways that suggest severe autism. But we're never going to know about any of his possible medications because they didn't test for it, and now his body has been cremated. The parents were mental health counselors, which again raises the question, well, did they have the power to prescribe their own son drugs? Again, well, I guess we'll never know. Maybe that would come out if the parents get charged in court and we can get records about what prescriptions he might have been on. I talked to somebody who's an expert in these kind of toxicology and autopsy procedures who told me that, well, because the cause of death is obvious, it was a gunshot wound to the head, the coroner and the medical examiner aren't required to go above and beyond and test for any little possible chemical substance, which in a normal case, that makes sense. But in a presidential assassination attempt, I just think it boggles the mind that you wouldn't test for everything to make sure this guy, there's dozens of reasons you'd want a comprehensive test in a case like this.
With all this in mind, Ken finished typing and clicked publish.
Threw it online and then drove all the way home from Butler all the way back to my apartment in Charlotte that night. It was a long, long day, but the drive back to Charlotte was very nice. I was just I accomplished what I came here to do. My boss will probably be happy, and we got a big scoop.
Back in Charlotte, Ken's editor saw the fruits of that strange weekend in Pennsylvania.
We saw he was suddenly just surging in terms of the amount of clicks he was getting. He's really sort of performed well on Twitter also with it.
Some giant accounts with 100,000 followers, 200,000 followers, they've been sharing my records and giving me credit. Seeing it blow up on the internet was, that was a thrill. That's kind of why I do this job. It's what makes it so fun.
Back home in Charlotte, Ken continued hoping that the Sheets worker he'd searched for in Butler was alright. Dave Stewart, who captured a lot of footage of the July 13th shooting, was still nowhere to be found. But about 2 weeks after Ken's trip, Dave Stewart re-emerged on X. He told his followers that he had needed a break, and that he had been followed around by police who seemed to suspect him as somehow being involved in the shooting. Of course, Dave Stewart was not involved. By the time Ken travelled to Butler, Dave had left Pennsylvania several weeks beforehand. Dave did not want to be formally interviewed for this podcast, but he told me that he wished that he had met Ken during his trip in October. On his part, Ken wrote to Dave on X when he re-emerged, saying he was glad he was okay, and they kept in touch.
Okay, maybe it's on this folder. Yeah, let's see.
Back home in the DC, Virginia area, James edited together a 1.5-minute video showcasing most of his footage. He posted it onto his X account a few days after Ken's scoop.
It was good to see Ken doing his job, getting something done that the mainstream just absolutely refused to do. It's like, it's insane to me that they were not on top of that, and it was just a lone guy like Ken, just pounding pavement and doing the work.
Even now, months later, the questions still linger about Thomas Crooks and his violent shooting.
The media has totally moved on from this story, and I could tell that because I read like an Associated Press article about it from a couple days ago, and they get basic facts wrong. They say Thomas Crooks was first spotted at 428 by a local sniper. Well, that's been debunked. So that tells me that like the Associated Press doesn't have one reporter who's dedicated to this story. New York Times hasn't done much. Wall Street Journal hasn't done much. It's not just the autopsy records. There's a whole trove of transcripts that the Senate Homeland Security Committee released a few weeks ago. I've gotten maybe 5 or 6 amazing stories out of this.
That conversation took place in October of 2024, but it still very much applies today in the summer of 2025. A few weeks before this recording, the New York Times and a few other big media outlets did publish a few stories about Thomas Crooks, but again, as of this recording, these stories have mostly been amalgamations of information that had already been reported by Ken or by others a long time beforehand. Likewise, no mainstream media outlets have given proper attention to Ken's scoop. 1 month ago, as of this recording, CBS News obtained hundreds of college emails that Thomas Crooks had sent. They were mainly to his professors and revolved around his academic pursuits. While an impressive scoop in its own right, CBS only released a small portion from one email and quoted from a few others. So Ken filed a records request, received the hundreds of emails, and he published all of them. Granted, there was a small amount of original info reported by the New York Times this June. The Times said that Crooks visited a handful of websites, including Reddit and an unnamed website, quote, for Xbox users, unquote. He also visited Spotify. But there was no info about whether he communicated with anyone on those sites. This was understandable, as the Times only received a list of some website domains that Crooks visited only while logged in to his college internet network. As the Times' Steve Ader noted, Crooks often used an encrypted connection to hide his online footprint, for some reason. But a few early news reports also claimed that Thomas Crooks searched the internet for something else very soon before his death. He had reportedly searched for pornography.
There's probably terabytes of online data about Crooks that the FBI hasn't released yet.
In the second episode of The Panic in Bethel Park, we'll start delving into Crooks' online activity. We'll also discuss strange activity that Bethel Park experienced preceding Crooks' assassination attempt.
Building the AMPHO bombs that were going to be triggered remotely, that's not something, even if you have like 150 IQ as a teenager, you're not going to teach yourself to do that. Just makes people wonder, who was this kid talking to?
And we'll talk about some intriguing figures who showed up in Bethel Park after the shooting, who were linked to the US intelligence community.
I mean, his motive still seems completely up in the air, right? I mean, the fact that no motive whatsoever has come out is just weird. It's strange.
We'll also hear about journalist Dana Kennedy's trip to the area in the winter after Ken's journey to Bethel Park. Among other guests, you'll hear a lot from Crooks' school guidance counsellor, Jim Knapp, who I recently interviewed.
In the 2 years that he was removed from high school that I remember him, it wasn't the Thomas Crooks that I know that I would have ever expected to do what he did.
We'll also bring you a lot more about Crooks' personal background, including his family. This is a developing story. Something changed in Thomas Crooks before his violent attack. His father spotted him dancing in his bedroom in the dead of night, talking to someone who wasn't there. Something, or someone, seemed to be driving him mad. And now, it is time for this series' first dirge of the sex-deprived, in anticipation of next episode's pornographic descent into the World Wide Web.
Always underrated, keep them devastated. Ain't did nothing with the game, so I had to confiscate it. Steady bringing heat, guess that's why they hate it. No, I ain't popping bottles, I'm looking like a model, trying to make it to the finish line. I'm going full throttle. Flows mighty, kinda hollow. Latest trends I don't follow, just a piece of reality, a hard pill to swallow. Write my own bars, I did that. Shots fired, you ain't ready for this combat. In fact, I'm just trying to make an impact, and I stay hungry. You can show me what the underdog, but they still sleeping on me. Making hit after hit, they ain't even know. Have a seat, cause your girl putting on the show. Dropping bombs, stay calm. Xxtrah is about to got you lanes going crazy. Yo, when sauce do not faze me. They offering it to pay me, but like the past, you can't change me. Feel like it all stays the same. It's a shame, change the game. I see they don't get the picture, so they refrain to refrain. You steady lost in these words. I'm about that action like birds. I stay on do not disturb, but serve you wanna be heard. I said I'm done being nice, no longer making it right. I'm about to sit on my throne, and we are nothing but the underdog, but they still sleeping on me. Making hit after hit, they ain't even know. Have a seat, cause your girl putting on the show. Dropping bombs, stay calm. Xxtrah is about to blow. The underdog, but they still sleeping on me. Making hit after hit, they ain't even know. Have a seat, cause your girl putting on the show. Dropping bombs, stay calm. Xxtrah is about to blow. Because I stay. I'm always.
Thank you very much to Ken Silva, Ben Sellers, James Rogers and Jim Knapp for participating in today's episode. Thank you to Xxtrah Oliver for giving permission to use her song Ceefour as today's closing dirge. And thanks to Dave Stewart and James Rogers for giving permission to use audio from their respective footage. This episode was written and narrated by me, Matthew Tanamelji, from Commendable Commotion. You can follow Commendable Commotion on Substack, YouTube and X for more. We are also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. See you next time.